Fox 5 has been covering the severe teaching shortage throughout Clark County schools, and thousands of substitute teachers have to fill in the gaps. There's a statewide proposal to lure more back to the classroom by helping them get health care.
It's just nice being around young people and being of service.
Brandon Summers loves being a long-term substitute teacher at CCSD to make sure he can also work as a musician in the entertainment capital of the world. He's one of thousands of subs making $110 to $200 a day, filling Clark County's staggering teacher shortage. A bill that passed the state assembly wants to lure more subs into the classroom with health care.
Honestly, for the amount of work that we're doing, the same amount of work as a teacher, we weren't getting paid adequately. But you have to work an entire school year before you're eligible.
Brandon says it was tough to work a full year as a CCSD sub before benefits kicked in, and he says retired teachers may be willing to come back for health care. The Health Insurance for Long-Term Substitutes Act would create the title of full-time substitute teacher. School districts must provide a health care subsidy of $450 a month. It kicks in on the 30th consecutive day of teaching. Subs must provide proof of health care coverage. The cost to CCSD is $17 million a year. Other proponents say the funds are already there with all the teacher vacancies, and other full-time jobs outside education provide those same benefits.
But unfortunately, as it's currently written, regretfully in opposition due to the administrative challenges.
A spokesperson for CCSD in opposition told lawmakers the proposal would add an immense amount of work for staff to determine who is eligible. Schools, not the district, would have to pay for it, and the district would rather focus on helping more people become full-time teachers.
To represent Nevada Association of School Superintendents, we can't ignore the fact it is an unfunded mandate. So
the bill's in the Senate now. If it's signed, it would affect full-time subs starting July of this year.